introduce yourself and state your affiliation or interest in the chat box. To find the chat box, just go to the bottom of the screen and click the little thought bubble. Chat box will pop open. For the sake of time, we're going to take questions in this chat box during the presentation. We might be answering some of those questions throughout the presentation. If we don't get to your question, then we're going to answer it after the fact and post that final Q&A to our website. If you'd like me to send this directly to you, just put your email address in there and I will do so. So first up, we're going to hear from Ross Heiner, our Dam Safety Program Manager, who's going to give an overview of the Portland District Dam Safety Program and ongoing dam safety projects happening in the Valley. After that, we're going to hear from Eric Peterson, our Operations Project Manager for the Willamette Valley Project. Eric is going to go over current water conditions, forecasts, and how we plan to manage water throughout the upcoming months. Thank you for listening in, and we're going to get started with Ross's presentation.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. You should be able to hear me. My name is Ross Heiner. I'm the Dam Safety Program Manager here in Portland District. I'm a structural engineer. I've been with the Corps of Engineers for about 12 years. I've been the Program Manager for Dam Safety here in Portland District for about 3.5 years. And before Eric starts with the main presentation, I wanted to take the opportunity to give an update on some dam safety activities that we have, including an overview of the program. I'll give an overview of the Willamette Valley Project, and then use the example of last April to kind of help explain how the Willamette Valley Project is operated for both flood risk management and the conservation benefits. Give an overview of the dam safety program within the Corps of Engineers, and update and overview of our risk assessments, and some recent risk reduction activities that we've had ongoing here in the Valley. So it gets started, kind of the big picture of all these different projects that make up the Willamette Valley system. Includes 13 multi-purpose dams, starting construction in 1941 with the completion of FERN Dam, all the way up to the completion of Blue River Dam in 1969. So the Willamette Valley Project just recently last year celebrated its 50th anniversary of its current status of the 13 multi-purpose dams. So as you look across the valley, there's the projects are spread out geographically, different site locations, different types of constructions, different areas of design, etc. So it's a really interesting group of dams to be able to research and learn about. You have the very large concrete structures in Detroit and Green Peter, very tall, large earthen embankments, rockfill dams like Cougar, Blue River, Hills Creek. So these projects are somewhat unique, and it's kind of our job to dive into the details, the ways that they were constructed, how they performed over time, and what the future might bring to the dams, and ensure and study how they perform going into the future. So I've got this illustration that kind of shows our water control diagram here on the upper left, and on an annual basis how we make the balance every year between the flood storage and the flood risk management operations for the project and the conservation season. As we're entering now into May, we're just into what should be our full conservation storage season for the roll curve, and this blue line is unique for each project, but generally follows a similar shape where the reservoirs are drawn down in the winter for November through January to maximize the available flood storage behind the dams and in the reservoirs, and that corresponds with our wet winter seasons and our as you can see Fall Creek, a majority of our rainfall is experienced November through January, and the amount of flood storage and allocation is directly relational to that. And so as we refill on this curve, our available flood storage and our ability to capture and mitigate the damages for those flood events late in the season is minimized, and that's a balance that we play every year. You can see Fall Creek and others in the other projects in the valley. There is additional flood storage that's carried through the summer months for the oddball rain events that we get here in the summer times. And so this is these other authorized purposes besides flood risk management kind of all contribute to those conservation needs: water supply, water quality, augmentation for fish and wildlife, recreation, hydropower are all balanced with flood risk management. This is something we have to balance on an annual basis. And so an example of how we had to operate for flood risk management recently is April of last year. We got a late season atmospheric river system that came through in mid-April, and really some projects were below that rule curve, so we had some additional flood storage than we normally would not have. Some projects were at or just above the rule curve, and so we had less storage and time to react to that inflow event. And so Green Peter and Foster dams are located on the South Santiam, and they're operated in tandem. You see the blue outline here, the blue area, the drainage area, or the watershed that's upstream of Green Peter Dam. And the red area here is the watershed upstream of Foster Dam. And so the way we operate for both the flood events and for making minimum flow releases during conservation season is by our control points downstream. And this downstream of Foster Dam is Waterloo gauge, operated by the USGS, and that's our control point. And so for flood operations, our goals are to keep that flood stage at or below this 12-foot elevation, which is the flood stage. And that's kind of a threshold for when property and other infrastructure begins to start getting inundated with water. And so you can see on this curve on the left is a hydrograph, and it's basically a curve of what the observed flood stage was or the observed river stage at that downstream gauge throughout the early part of April. And we've all heard the term flattening the curve recently, and this is a different type of curve, and the goal is to flatten this curve, take the peak off of these flood events, and use the dams to moderate and regulate the flood waters that are at those downstream locations. And so what this shows in red is the computed unregulated flow, and what that means is what the river stage would have been without the presence of the dams, or if the dams were just passing whatever flow was coming into the reservoirs. And you can see there's a reduction of about 4 feet, and so it's 4 less feet of water that was in that area near that gauge location. So there's different control points in different locations. You see, on the North Santiam, we have Detroit and its drainage basin, and then a control point at Mahima. And so these all are operated at with those downstream control points in mind. So those North Santiam and South Santiam come together. They just upstream of the Jefferson gauge, and you can see how those two project outflows, in addition to all of this unregulated watershed, kind of in gray here, all add up to what was observed, and the flood stage at watershed, including all the outflow from the 13 dams that we operate and regulate. And you can see throughout the basin, there was about a 4 to 5 foot reduction in that peak flood stage. And so really what the dams are intended to do is moderate those flows, take the peaks off of the flood events and supplement for additional flow during the dry times of the year. And we'll hear more about that flow augmentation and additional flow and conservation storage later in Eric's presentation. So that really that's kind of the way we operate. And going back to the April event, we maximized our flood storage at most all of our projects, and we were beyond our conservation levels into the exclusive flood control space in many of our projects. And so there is a limitation, especially late in the year and for back-to-back storm events associated with how much or how extreme flood events and rain events can occupy and fill up our reservoirs. And so what the dams do in those extreme events is kind of provide some warning and provide some time to and notice to people downstream that there might be large releases. In the April case, we were able to contain and moderate the majority of those flow events and reduce a lot of potential property damage and life safety risk. So the dam safety program is really a shared responsibility across the entire organization to include the general public and our partner agencies downstream. Within the Corps of Engineers, we have a robust dam safety program, which includes inspections, both on a periodic basis, a 5-year really deep dive into the projects and performance history, annual inspections to look at how the dams are performing on an annual basis, looking at recommendations and key areas of interest to monitor the performance over time. Dam safety training to make sure the people that are on site on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis know what signs to look for of potential problems and are able to know what to do in response to those potential scenarios. We also, monitor the performance of our dams with instrumentation that we monitor on a real-time and monthly basis. But really, the biggest part of our dam safety program is doing the preventative maintenance activities, operating and maintaining the dams the way that they were designed and intended to be operated, so that they are reliable and perform the functions that they were intended to perform when they were constructed. I'll talk a lot about risk assessments, and risk assessments are kind of a newer addition to the dam safety program over the past couple of decades, as we've have as the Corps of Engineers a portfolio of dams of over 700, 20 high hazard potential dams in Portland District that I'm responsible for, that we're responsible for. But these risk assessments are a way to really prioritize long-term investments, improvements, and assess the need for major modifications if warranted as our infrastructure ages, I would say. So risk assessments are a way to analyze risk, and so it's important to make sure we have clear definitions of what risk means. And so a lot of people have risk in their heads and have maybe a slightly different definition of what that means. In dam safety, we have a very specific definition of what it means, just so we can be uniform and quantitative with our estimates. And so the way we look at risk is to understand the hazards, what types of loading also are potential hazards as well as earthquake loadings. And so what we do is try to go beyond the normal, beyond the loads that were considered in the original design to what's most likely, and then to some very extreme scenarios. And we take those hazards or loadings and assess the dams for how they're likely to respond to those given scenarios. How likely are they to perform well? What are potential ways that there could be a problem or what could go wrong? And we assign probabilities and estimates to those two different categories, hazards and performance. The third and really the most important part of risk is the consequences. If there's a problem with a dam, there's some projects, including many in the Willamette Valley, there's an extremely large amount of water that's stored behind the dams at any given time. And so there's with the population and cities and development that are downstream of our projects, it's important to understand how many people are downstream, who's downstream, what potential scenarios would result in how much flooding, how much warning time would there be, et cetera, so that we can we understand those consequences and are able to factor that into the expected performance of the dams, so that our risks are at tolerable levels. And so risk is really a function of all three of these different components. And so we do risk assessments to look at all three of these factors, and that helps us inform our decision making in the long term. A risk assessment, if we need further information, we do a routine risk assessment on a 10-year basis, and then for some projects that are prioritized on a national level, we go into advanced risk assessments called issue evaluation studies that dive into all three of these categories. So you may have seen drill rigs out at some projects drilling borings into the dam and their foundations to better understand the material properties and the strength properties, so that we can plug those values into computer models and simulations of how the dams are going to perform in extreme seismic loadings. And so we've done probabilistic seismic hazard analyses or associated with the earthquake hazards here in the Pacific Northwest. We've looked at we're looking not only at the most likely type of Cascadia subduction zone earthquakes, but going, what are the most extreme scenarios? What are the most, what's the least likely, but essentially most damaging earthquake that could be experienced at any of our projects? And so we assess the dams for performance at all of those different levels. So, risk is the fundamental. We're trying to understand this risk component, and that helps inform where the dams may be classified. We have 5 classifications for risk, very high all the way to very low. Because of the seismic setting of our region and the size and scale of our projects and the populations downstream of our projects, so a lot of our projects are in this high to moderate range as we study them further. At some projects, as we study them further, we're identifying potential issues that need to be looked for long-term solutions. For instance, at Lookout Point, we've identified that the risks are at a moderate level, but that there's the spillway gates require a detailed study to improve their seismic performance for some very extreme earthquake loading that we need to consider. So there's different levels of risk assessments. The routine risk assessments are the basis of our program, and then we have several advanced risk assessments that are ongoing at many of the higher risk projects. now to update the risk classification from high to low. And what we've seen is what the risk assessment has told us is that we've identified trunnion friction associated with the spillway gates as a risk driver, and now that some of our improvements that we've made on the infrastructure and the spillway gates have reduced the risk associated with the project to a low level, and we're able to go into our routine activities at Green Peter. And so as we finish and learn more about our projects, we'll be sharing that information both visually and in meetings such as this. So I mentioned spillway gates, and I'll give a quick update on where we are with the spillway gate rehabilitation program before I hand it off to Eric. But in the early 2010, some of our climbing inspections, where we did these types of hands-on inspections of the miter gates, the painter gates, spillway gates, we identified some buckling or some initial signs of distress associated with these gates. And so what we have done is analyze these gates per updated guidance and increased knowledge from when they were constructed. And what they didn't consider in the original design was friction developing in these hinge points, what we call trunnion pins. And so over time, as these components wear and they begin to get harder to lubricate, there's frictional forces that develop there. And so what that results in potentially overstressing these structural members. And so what we've done is either go in and put these cover plates on the members, as you see here in red, or as you see at Big Cliff, is go in and replace that entire end frame with new modern steel and new less frictional, higher reliability, less friction trunnion pins. And so that both increases the structural reliability of these gates. But along with that, we've gone and upgraded the electrical and mechanical components at these projects to give increased reliability that they will operate when they're needed and called upon. And so as you can see on the chart on the right, these spillway gate rehabilitations have been completed at several of the projects in construction right now at Detroit, and a couple of gates to finish at Cougar and Hills Creek. But over the past 10 years, the district has been able to really make some great progress and some great risk reduction as far as spillway gate performance. And so that's helping to reduce the total risk associated with our dams. And I'm going to jump into the chat box and see if there's any questions that you guys have put in there that I can respond to. Otherwise, as Lauren mentioned, we'll be addressing those in the follow-up communication. With that, I will pass it over to Eric Peterson, the Operations Product Manager, and for the remainder of the presentation.
I think you have to unmute yourself, Eric.
Thank you, Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
I am working to kind of take control of the presentation here. And can you see it, Lauren?
Yes.
Great. All right. Thank you, Ross. I really appreciated your presentation, your update there. We're really fortunate to have Ross and his team in the Portland District. I think we have probably the best dam safety program in the nation, and certainly a lot of large population at risk downstream means that we don't want just good enough. We want the very best in the business, and I think we have that. I want to also say thank you all for being here today, for investing this time. I know that this is an important subject to a lot of folks, that you want and need to know what the conservation season looks like. There's a lot at stake, a lot of trade-offs. upstream and downstream interests and really competing demands for our scarce water resource. I want to recognize that it takes a team of people to do this. I want to thank Dustin Bankston, Lauren Bennett, Selena Hart, Greg Taylor, Christy Johnson, and Alan Davis for contributing to this format and this adaptive approach to reach out to you, our really important stakeholders and partners. I hope this will be insightful and productive. My presentation today is going to talk a little bit about how we're responding and how we're managing operating and maintaining these facilities in the constrained environment, this COVID-19 environment. I'll move into this year's water year, talk a little bit about the system overview, current conditions, snow water equivalent and precipitation data. We'll look a little bit back at prior years and do some comparisons, talk about the 2020 water level forecast, and then also similarly in the chat box be able to provide facilitate opportunity for questions and comments. So these are my marching orders to our staff here in the Willamette Valley. Since this really upset condition began for us, our focus has been on supporting the emergency, which means we're going to continue operating facilities, we're going to continue to move water and make power while taking care of people. That includes monitoring our facilities, protecting our assets and natural and cultural resources, and managing fish passage. We've adapted our teams and sustained our work effort without much impact to our mission. We've done that through a variety of ways, and our people have worked really hard to adapt to protect themselves, keep themselves healthy, and be able to sustain our mission. As a consequence of working with the state and the governor's office, we are beginning to open up some recreation areas this week. That's a good thing, so that people can get outside, enjoy the outside, enjoy our recreation areas safely. Some of our day use areas and boat ramps in particular are going to be open, and this weekend is forecast to be a really nice weekend. So perhaps some of you on the call can get out and be able to enjoy our facilities. More at a higher level, the organization is doing a lot in response to the pandemic. We have assessed facilities and have built out alternative care facilities. And in particular, in our area, we've conducted assessments in Silverton, North Bend, and Eugene. And Eugene is being constructed now, scheduled for completion next week, and will be used for unhoused persons who show symptoms and need care and sequestration. So it'll be completed next week, and that's how we're contributing as an agency to the broader pandemic going on right now. On to the water year. Current conditions for this year, available on the teacup diagram. You can see that we're about 20% below where we would hope to be ordinarily this time of the year. We're at 77% full, or about 23% below the full conservation storage available. This is our teacup diagram, the diagram on the left here, and this is available online to everybody listening, to the general public. And there's a link at the end of the presentation. I think you'll be able to see this if you're not familiar with it. It's important to note that the spillway gate work at Detroit did not have impacts on refill. We were already back to the water control diagram, the bottom of where we anticipated where we should be at the time that we would begin refill at the beginning of February. It's also important to note that while we have interim risk reduction measures in place for seismic vulnerabilities that we're investigating right now at Hills Creek and Lookout Point, we're not going to get anywhere near those elevations because of refill season, a dry refill season. So those interim risk reduction measures are not going to have bearing on our conservation storage this season. All right, for this year, this diagram shows actual precipitation for the months beginning in February, and you can see the red means below 50%, and and everything else is sort of in between. So February, you can see that everything was below 50%. In March, we had a little bit more precipitation in the Willamette Basin. Some sub-basins were between 50 and 70%. Then into April, virtually the entire basin was red again, below 50%. You see a short span of 4 days for May. We had a little recovery in May where much of the basin was above average for a few days, and that has helped us out a little bit. It's important to remember that this whole refill season, if we're going to characterize it, it's been really dry, and the exception is the beginning of May. But May is when things really begin to dry up in the valley. So even if we get high precip for May is much drier than April, March, or February, and so there's less consequence, less impact on our ability to refill. We need good, steady, or above average precipitation distributed from February until June, really to have a really good, robust refill season and have adequate water or abundant water to work with. Here's a little bit of a comparison to 2015. This 2020, this water year, you can see in February we were drier than in 2015. Same with March. Same with March, and then also in April. The difference for us has been that we had better snow in January and February and in March. There was more water tied up in snow. Now, some of that water has come off, and it's also important to remember that the Willamette Basin is not a snow-driven system predominantly, but that snow does help, and it did help. This year, you can see the graph at the left here. The black line is the actual snow water equivalent in the Willamette Basin. The purple line here is the maximum observed. The red line at the bottom is the minimum ever observed. And then you can look at the coloration to see where we were this year compared to the median and compared to other years. The green X that you see here is the medium peak snow water equivalent. Our peak snow water equivalent came a little bit later, and in some ways that helped us. You can see that the line dropped off very quickly, this black line, and that means that a lot of that snow, a lot of the water in the snow came off quickly, and that's why we had some rebound in late April and May in terms of inflows coming in and impacting the system. At the beginning of April, I think we were at about 110% snow water equivalent in the system. And now we're down to about 59% of snow water equivalent in the system. So much of that moisture has come off, which means for the remainder of the spring and summer season, it's not going to have as much bearing on inflows in the system. In terms of the longer-term forecast, this is 1 month look out. The temperatures are expected to be above average, and there's an equal chance of above average or below average precipitation with a little bit of drought predicted in the southwest corner of the state. But that's 1 month out. Forecasts longer than about 3 days are always a little bit speculative. When you look at drought conditions at the end of April, our area, the Willamette Basin, was designated severe drought throughout much of our region. Abnormally or moderate drought to severe drought through the entire basin. Now, it's important just to recognize from a flow management standpoint, we start looking at trade-offs, we start looking at competing demands. Is it better to store water so that we have more water available later in the season to provide for water quality in the tributaries in the mainstem Willamette, or to manage for temperatures, or is it better to hit those spawning flows early in the season and forego the water storage that would benefit us later in the season? It was a difficult start to the water year, and as I noted, conditions have been marginally improving, and there's a lot of variability in the system. In particular, seems pretty abundant in the South Santiam system, less abundant in the North Santiam, and certainly On the Long Tom, sort of to the southwest of the basin, it's been a really dry refill season. So early on, working with our partners, the National Marine Fisheries Service, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and other partners, we all agreed that storing some additional water early on would help us. And we had planned, if we had not diminished mainstem Willamette target flows for the month of April, we would have had to pull more from the system, and we would have ended up with about 908,000 acre-feet of storage in the system, which is a less than adequate water year. Because we didn't have targets for the mainstem Willamette, we conserved some more of that storage water, recognizing that water temperatures were pretty cool and that a cooler spring helped us out there, helped water quality and fisheries habitat. So we were able to forego those minimum flows, and as a consequence, we stored an extra couple 100,000 acre-feet. That, combined with late April, early May increases in flows, tributary flows coming into the reservoirs, it looks like we'll have about 1.2 million acre-feet of storage, which puts us in the adequate range for the season, which gives us a little bit more to work with, and that's a good thing. On the tributary flows that we reduced early in the season, we reduced tributary flows on both the north and south Santiam systems, and as a consequence, we were able to store back some of that water, and that helped us. So again, to summarize, no augmentation for April mainstem Willamette flow targets. We reduced minimum targets, meaning biological opinion. That's what we need to do to comply with the Endangered Species Act. But we negotiated some better outcomes that helped us to optimize water through the season. And we negotiated down to about 1,100 CFS for the South Santiam flows and 1,200 CFS for the North Santiam flows. For May, we are, because our storage is back up, we're going to have some mainstem minimum flow targets based on conditions. Right now, that looks like about 15,000 cubic feet per second for a 7-day average at Salem, and a hard minimum target of 13,000 cubic feet per second, the lower limit at Salem. We're going to continue to assess tributary targets and work with our partners adaptively over time to optimize the water that we have stored for downstream needs, both water quality, tributary habitat, and mainstem water quality. Let's take a look at the hydrographs for the forebay elevations at actual reservoirs. So this is Hills Creek, the Middle Fork. It's a pretty tough water year up the Middle Fork subbasin, and you can see where we are right now. This darker red line shows actual forebay elevation and the refill curve since we started refilling in January timeframe. We've been behind all along. You can see last year we had that peak in April where we filled up and we pulled it back down to water control diagram. We never did get full again last April. So this year, 2020, looks very parallel, very similar to the 2015 water year up the Middle Fork, although the rate of refill has gotten a little bit steeper than where we were in 2015, and we may end up having a little bit better water year than 2015 up the Middle Fork. Lookout Point, really parallel, although better than 2015, much more similar to the 2018 water year at this point. Again, this heavy black line is the water control diagram. That's sort of our risk tolerance threshold, and Ross did a nice job describing how this works. It's pretty intuitive when you think about it and look at it. That's Lookout Point. Fall Creek, looking a little bit better than 2015, a little worse than 2019. It's going to be a fairly tough year, but still plenty of recreation opportunities there at Fall Creek. for people to get out. Cottage Grove, right now we're a little bit behind. Cottage Grove can be flashy. I know that we have some water in the forecast coming and hope we can make up some of this delta there at Cottage Grove. Dorena, we're holding pretty close to the curve right now, and Dorena is more flashy than Cottage Grove. We should have a reasonable water year there this year. Cougar, we're a little steeper than our water control diagram now, but it's tapering off. We'll see what that precipitation does for us next year. We're a little bit behind 18, but certainly much better than 2015. And folks I talked to, Greg Taylor in particular, thinks that we'll have an okay water year at Cougar. Blue River, we're right on curve, doing okay there. Green Peter on curve. Again, South Santiam system doing a little bit better than much of the rest of the Willamette Basin. And Foster will be holding steady this year as we pull water from Green Peter to hold the pool fairly steady during the recreation season. There's not a lot of storage in Foster to begin with, and those trade-offs are pretty easy and benign. Detroit's a tough one. I'm optimistic that we'll see a reasonably good rec season at Detroit. Here we're above 2015, below 2018 and 2019 right now at Detroit, below 2016. We'll look at forecasts in just a little bit. So Hills Creek forecast, here's where we are today. The blue line is the 50% elevation non-exceedance threshold. That means it's 50-50 whether we'll exceed this elevation. And so you can see where we are now. We don't expect to fill a whole lot more at Hills Creek up the Middle Fork. And Middle Fork being our most impaired system when it comes to refill for this conservation season. Lookout Point, very analogous to Hills Creek. Fall Creek, a little bit better. Expect to see a little bit of rise there. The red line on any of these graphics really represents the 95% elevation non-exceedance. That means it's 95% likely that statistically that we will not see water go above this elevation as it's outlined. Again, Fall Creek, we'll see a little bit of a rise and holding steady through the summer months based on the modeling. Cottage Grove, we'll see a little rise there, and then we anticipate tapering off beginning in July. Dorena looks better. Fern Ridge looks pretty tough. We expect to see a little bit of elevation gain there, up close to 369 or so, and then tapering off. And again, the Long Tom subbasin, we have been flowing minimum outflows from Fern Ridge since the second week of February, after we had the last big event on that subbasin, or that part of the system. So we've been letting out 50 CFS since the second week of February, which is our minimum, and that's pretty unprecedented. That rarely, I don't think in the 16 years that I've been here in the Willamette Valley, I don't think I've seen it quite this dry for Fern Ridge or the Long Tom. There's Cougar. We see some increase there. Yeah, it's a fairly steep increase, and then the model reflecting a fairly steep decrease, recognizing that we're going to be pulling water from Cougar to augment mainstem flows coming out. Blue River, you see the same thing there. We'll bump up. We'll begin using Blue River fairly early to sustain targets downstream. Detroit, we're still on a longer trajectory to refill at Detroit, but as you can see, it doesn't look bad at Detroit. The forecast, based on the modeling, looks pretty good. Recognize that with Detroit, if we pull water from Detroit to augment the main stem, we don't impact a lot of the main stem downstream because the North Santiam comes in fairly downstream on the main stem Willamette. And so the bigger benefits for the main stem Willamette at Albany and Salem are really from storage projects on Mackenzie and on the Middle Fork. Green Peter looks good, although you see a fairly steep decline after about the end of June. That's because on the South Santiam, we use some of that stored water to augment main stem flows to meet those main stem water quality targets. And Foster holding steady. So I ran through that data fairly fast. Need to recognize the Middle Fork is going to be the impaired system in terms of storage. That the South Santiam will be used to augment main stem flows fairly early on. The North Santiam, Detroit will have some recreation this season. If our modeling holds true, it looks pretty good. Fern Ridge is going to be a little bit tougher recreation year than people are used to, and that's simply a function of not having very much precipitation during the refill season in the Long Tom. And this water year, despite the fact that refill season has been really dry, we've benefited from having some snow come off fairly early to help refill. We're managing adaptively, which has also given us some more options. Timely precipitation is improving our forecast. We'll continue to manage adaptively, working with our partners to do so. We'll continue to do so, and we'll continue to keep you informed of the decisions that are being made. We will continue to try to assess, understand, and optimize our supply of water with the flow targets that we have downstream. And again, we'll do our best to communicate with partners and stakeholders as our forecasts and as flow conditions change. So there are more resources available to you here to get questions into us. Again, use the chat box right now if you'd like to get questions answered immediately. Some helpful resources there are listed: Portland District, the teacup diagram, and the Northwest River Forecast Center. Great website provided by NOAA that gives you lots of information, hydrologic information that helps inform your thinking about the system. Also, the email address there for our Public Affairs Office, Lauren, and the folks in Public Affairs, as well as a phone number for those folks. Again, I want to thank everyone for taking time to be here. I want to thank our team within the Corps of Engineers for working hard day in and day out to sustain the mission that we do, to balance all of these competing demands, and to be on the job, rain, shine, sun, flood, or drought. This picture here is a picture from I think it was probably Big Cliff Dam a couple of years ago when we were doing some spillway gate work there. In any event, I just liked it. Wanted to put the snow on there as we head into the summer season. If you have questions, please hit the chat box, and I want to thank you again for taking time to get a clear picture of what's happening.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Ross, and thank you to everyone who listened in. I'm going to hang on till 6 and then end the WebEx, but we have 6 more minutes left if anyone wants to submit any questions. Otherwise, we'll just hold on till 6. And we also have 2 other engagements this week if you have interested friends. The next one is tomorrow